I think the worst phone call I've had to make to my dad is when I was fresh out of college and working in Tennessee. I got cut off on an exit ramp and didn't have enough space to stop, so I ended up in a fender bender. Well, my fenders, bumper, hood, and headlights all needed a makeover, but the Honda CR-V that darted in front of me bore only a 2.5-inch scratch from my license plate screw. I was devastated, blaming myself for what happened, hating having to explain to coworkers that yes, I'd been in a wreck. But the person I dreaded calling most was my dad. My dad who taught me to drive and taught me to be careful. I wasn't looking forward to him thinking I wasn't careful. I wasn't looking forward to disappointing him. I put that call off as long as I could that day, dialing up USAA first to start the claim. A nice man named Brandon took my call, started the claim, and helped me find a body shop that could repair my car. He asked if there was anything else I needed help with, and I made an offhanded comment that no, I was okay unless he had any tips for calling my dad. Brandon paused for a moment before sharing that he was a dad, and the first thing that he would want to hear would be that I was okay, then that the damage was minimal, and then circle back to me being okay. It was excellent advice, and my dad was indeed mostly concerned about my well-being. So Dad, when you listen to this episode and get to the part about the worst phone call that Chief Petty Officer Kuhn ever had to make to her father, please take a moment to reflect just how lucky we are that the worst call from me resulted in multiple reminders that no one was hurt. This is Conduct and Becoming. I'm Erin, and I'm your host. In 2021, 33-year-old Marine Corps veteran Colin Turner and his wife, Chief Petty Officer Bree Kuhn, and their 3 children lived in Gulf Breeze, Florida in support of Kuhn's career. At the time, she was stationed aboard Naval Air Station Pensacola. Now, during his service to the United States, Colin sustained a traumatic brain injury and was medically discharged from the Marine Corps with a 100% disability rating. During his 14 years in the Marine Corps, Colin worked in explosive ordnance disposal and rose to the level of gunnery sergeant. After sustaining his injury and separating from the Corps, Colin spent his time as a stay-at-home dad and student, studying electrical engineering remotely with Arizona State University. This setup allowed him to play the part of supportive spouse, following Kuhn where the Navy led her. As he grew close to earning his Bachelor of Science degree, Colin applied to and was accepted in the Electrical Engineering Master's program at Johns Hopkins University. I am in awe of how other people's brains work because there were 2 modules of AP Physics that I struggled with. I could handle the calculus just fine, but the module on light threw me for a loop because my little art brain had to distinguish between how pigment and how lights combined differently. Pure pigments, when combined, make black. Impure pigments, when combined, make brown. And light, when combined, is white. The other module that made me want to throw my hands in the air and quit was on electricity and magnetism. So the fact that Colin studied electrical engineering while also raising 3 kids and moving around is something that I really admire. It's not entirely clear what started this slow simmer of an argument on September 7th, 2021, an argument that spilled over into September 8th. Some source materials hypothesize that there was a growing dispute over custody, and that Colin sought to take the children away with him to his parents' house in Georgia. But soon that argument did more than simmer. The first call to 911 came in at 12:53 p.m. on the 8th. Kuhn summoned the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office deputies to their shared home. She alleged that Colin shoved her to the floor during their disagreement and also that he'd raped her that weekend. And while Colin gave his own statement, Kuhn removed the child seats and garage door opener from his truck and began preparing to take the children somewhere else herself. Because deputies didn't see any signs of a physical altercation or see any marks or bruises that corroborated Kuhn's statements, they left the family to figure out a resolution. At 5 p.m., Colin called 911. Deputies again responded, and Colin explained that he didn't think Kuhn could be trusted with the kids, sharing that earlier in the year Kuhn had tried to die by suicide and was subsequently diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. He stated that Kuhn had her pistol in the house and that his own firearm was in his truck. Deputies explained that there was nothing they could arrest Kuhn for, despite Colin's separate allegations. They said they couldn't do anything about financial coercion or other acts that Colin said Kuhn committed. That it would basically be a matter of who crossed the line first. That someone was going to shove, someone was going to grab, and that someone would be the one going to jail. The deputy advised Colin to give Kuhn space, but observed that he couldn't make either Colin or Kuhn leave the house. He advised Colin that if Kuhn started acting crazy, to pull out his phone and start recording. The police took the time to take written statements from both Colin and Kuhn, promising to write up a report. But because they again found nothing to corroborate any signs of physical altercation or abuse, they departed. Shortly after the police left, Colin reached out to Kuhn's ex, the father of Kuhn's eldest child. By text message, Colin shared that he and Kuhn were having an argument, describing Kuhn as losing it. He explained that she'd run his MacBook through the dishwasher the night before, on the 7th of September, because he'd turned off the Wi-Fi. Earlier in the day, he'd told the police that he had turned off the Wi-Fi late that night or early in the morning, so Kuhn couldn't keep streaming TV in the bedroom while Colin and the kids were trying to sleep. He told Kuhn's ex that he planned to take their 2 shared children and leave, but that Kuhn threatened to press charges if he took the eldest child, the child Kuhn shared with her ex. Colin had reached out to the ex to give him a heads up, to tell him it might be time for him to take legal action. The ex thanked Colin for the heads up, sharing that he had really hoped Kuhn was finally getting better. Colin replied that Kuhn had been kicked out of 2 group therapies and skipped her previous individual therapies, reporting that she'd still been drinking a lot. Kuhn's ex asked if everything was okay, and Colin responded that it was not. He'd said he thought it would get worse before it got better, and shared that Kuhn had always described her ex as the bad guy in their relationship. But he realized that maybe the problem was Kuhn. He described her as crazy as hell, and said she probably treated her ex the same way she was treating him. To his credit, Kuhn's ex took responsibility for the role he played in their relationship and breakup. Colin again texted Kuhn's ex, explaining that she locked him in the garage because he wouldn't talk to her. The ex responded that he was always willing to talk to Colin, that maybe he had insight that would help him get through to Kuhn. An hour and 22 minutes after Colin called the police, he placed a third 911 call from the residence. To dispatch, he explained that Kuhn tried to break his arm when he tried to return to their home, and then she'd locked him in the garage. During all this, the children were inside the home with Kuhn. As Colin narrated what was happening to the dispatcher requesting a third trip from deputies that evening, a loud bang echoed over the line before Colin cried out in pain. The operator asked what that noise was, and Colin exclaimed that Kuhn just shot him. 3 more bangs rang out before the dispatcher was met with cold silence. Before deputies arrived, Kuhn explained to their neighbors that she'd shot Colin, telling one of them that he was trying to take the kids. She said the same thing to deputies when they arrived. Deputies said Kuhn appeared to be in shock, so maybe my commentary is unfair. But I do think it's worth focusing on the words she used. She said Colin was trying to take the kids. And I think it's relevant for us to note that Kuhn didn't say Colin was trying to hurt the kids, threatening to hurt the kids, or threatening to hurt her. She didn't say she was afraid Colin might have a weapon. She said she shot Colin because he was trying to take the kids. Investigators began taking statements and escorted Kuhn to the police station for her interview. After advising her of her right to a lawyer, Kuhn inquired whether she was under arrest, and the detectives informed her that she was not. I do wonder if that was hard for Kuhn to believe as she sat huddled in a chair with her hands cuffed, having already admitted to shooting Colin. Sometime around 8:30 p.m., detectives asked Kuhn to walk them through the day to explain what happened through her eyes. She recounted calling the police the first time, around 1 p.m., because she and Colin were arguing. She reiterated that he was threatening to take the kids, that he said her recent attempt to die by suicide meant that no judge would give her custody. Kuhn said that during that early disagreement, Colin pushed her up against the doorway near their bathroom before throwing her to the ground and telling her no one would believe her if she reported it. She described locking Colin out of the house for an hour, a period during which she was texting and calling him, upset that he wouldn't talk to her. She said one of her children woke up from a nap and wouldn't calm down, so she took the child outside to Colin for Colin to try. I was struck by how often Kuhn described their children as hers alone during this interview. Colin's body wasn't even cold, and she'd already written him out of her vocabulary. And this detail, the inconsolable child that Kuhn took out to Colin, gave me the ick. I mean, it's a murder. I already had the ick. But to my ear, it sounded like Kuhn was using their child like a pawn. Colin wouldn't answer her texts. Colin wouldn't answer her phone calls. So she brought their child outside with her and again tried to talk with him, again becoming upset that he wouldn't talk to her. And yes, of course, this requires some inference and extrapolation. But it does seem consistent with what Colin texted Kuhn's ex. That she'd locked him in the garage not because he was a danger, not because he was a threat to Kuhn, but because he wasn't engaging with her and wasn't responsive to her attempts to talk. After leaving the child outside with Colin, Kuhn returned to the home, texted Colin again, and then came out to retrieve their child when he didn't respond. Evidently, that's when Colin summoned the police again at around 5. Sometime during that police visit, around 5, Kuhn learned that Colin had disclosed to the police that she suffered from mental health issues, and that he didn't believe the children were safe with her. During her interview, Kuhn first contended that she couldn't remember what happened after deputies left that second time. But she described calling her mom, she described locking Colin out of the house again, alleged that he tried to come into the house, described blocking the door and again locking him out. She claimed she didn't remember grabbing the pistol, or where she got it from, but then Kuhn admitted shooting Colin. She said she didn't mean to shoot him, claimed she didn't know how many times she shot him, but admitted that it was at least twice, which is a lot of detail for someone who didn't remember what happened. She said after shooting Colin, she took the children to a neighbor's house to again dial 911. She told police that she wanted to go back to help Colin because she'd shot him, and described opening the garage door for the neighbors. Kuhn then asked investigators if Colin was dead, claiming no one would tell her until then. After detectives confirmed Colin's passing, Kuhn asked if she could talk to her dad. She actually asked that question 6 times, and investigators told her they had to get through their interview first, that it was important that they figure out how to make sense of what happened, how to make sense of what Kuhn did. Because with Colin's death, Kuhn was the only person who could provide those details. So detectives tried to gather those finer details, asking Kuhn where the gun, the pistol Colin described as hers, was normally kept. After a mid-length pause, Kuhn offered up that she'd put it in the kitchen. They asked again where the gun was normally kept, and Kuhn confessed it was normally stored in her closet on the upper shelf or shelves. No safe, no lockbox, just up. Easy to grab as long as you're tall enough to do so. They asked what Colin was doing in the garage when Kuhn opened the door, and she sidestepped answering. So they circled back, asking if Colin was talking to anybody on the phone, and again didn't really get a response. So later they tried again, inquiring if Colin was holding anything in his hand when she opened the door. They opened that door wide for Kuhn, inviting her to explain what happened, inviting her to make any claim of self-defense. They asked if it was an accident or if things had gotten out of hand, reminding her again that she was the only one that could offer an explanation. At 3 separate points during the interview, Kuhn demanded to know why the police hadn't arrested Colin when she'd summoned them in the afternoon. She never asked why they didn't arrest her. She also said that Colin should have just let her kill herself. And these stood out to me because both flavors of statement placed the blame elsewhere, first on the police and then on her dead husband. After gathering what they could from the interview, detectives allowed Kuhn to call her father at last. She explained that she was in an office, and he clarified that she meant she was at the police station. Then she offered up, "Daddy, I killed Colin." And her father responded, "I know you did, sweetie. I know you did." Which kind of seems to suggest that Kuhn already knew that Colin was dead before investigators confirmed it and had already spoken with her father. Her father explained that he was just trying to figure out why what happened. He asked if Colin was threatening her, but received no answer. Kuhn lamented that she would be going to jail, that she deserved to be in jail. And you may recall that I mentioned that Kuhn reported to the police that Colin had raped her that weekend. But to her father, Kuhn described an idyllic weekend, saying she and Colin had had such a good weekend, and that he'd been her best friend. Her dad said he understood that, and that things had gotten bad the night before, lightheartedly observing, "Obviously you didn't put his computer in the dishwasher. We're clear on that, He got no answer. He tried treading carefully, inquiring into the well-being of the children, whether Kuhn would need a lawyer, whether she waived her right to an attorney, whether she would plead. Kuhn again claimed she tried to help Colin after getting the kids out of the house. Her dad asked if Kuhn wanted them to come down, if there was anything they could do. Kuhn asked if he could take the kids, to keep them until she could get them back. And, as gently as he could, Kuhn's father said no. His emotions started to bubble up at that point, snapping that she'd done something terrible. And I cannot imagine what her father felt listening on the other end of her jailhouse call, listening to his daughter describe killing her husband, saying he had to believe there was a reason it happened, and receiving nothing in response. Sifting through everyone's statements, the police reports, and the details uncovered during the investigation, authorities in the state of Florida pursued charges of first-degree or premeditated murder. Kuhn's trial was briefly delayed as the courthouse braced for Hurricane Helene. But once the weather resolved, the trial proceeded. Kuhn and her attorneys wove a story of mental, physical, and sexual abuse at Colin's hands, behavior she attributed to the TBI he sustained while active duty. she claimed he'd been abusive towards her since his discharge. Not just towards her, but toward the children. Kuhn's attorney argued that Colin had threatened to kill the children before, and that with the firearms the family kept around the house and in Colin's truck, Kuhn believed he would act on those threats. They tried to persuade the jury that the simmering argument made Kuhn fearful that Colin would take the children and kill them. Kuhn declined to take the stand, negating the need for an expert to explain battered spouse syndrome to the jury. Of course, we can't rule out what Kuhn experienced or didn't experience, but we can highlight that if it happened, the jury probably didn't learn very much about it. A self-defense theory is a really bold claim, but perhaps it was still the best claim under the circumstances. Obviously, I didn't sit through the trial as a juror, and I don't have access to everything that was before the jury. But it's an uphill climb to say that a man locked in the garage on the phone with the police is an immediate threat to your physical safety. Colin wasn't breaking down the door in a fit of violent rage. I've not seen anything to suggest that he was trying to access any firearms in his truck, or that his truck was even in the garage. In fact, body camera footage from earlier in the day, during what I think was the second police visit to their home, shows Colin's truck out on the driveway. And over his shoulder you can see a garage that, no judgment, was not ready for him to pull the truck into. During Colin's final conversation, he indicated that Kuhn used physical force to keep him out of the house, which he described as trying to break his arm. He sought the assistance of police who had twice de-escalated their long argument that day. When the first shot didn't kill Colin, when he was able to explain to dispatch that Kuhn shot him, Kuhn didn't retreat, safe in the knowledge that police would be there soon to deal with whatever threat she believed existed in that moment. She pulled the trigger 3 more times, killing her husband while dispatch listened in. At the close of a 1-week trial and after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kuhn guilty of premeditated murder. The state hadn't sought the death penalty, so with that finding of guilt, the judge imposed a sentence of life in prison without parole. Kuhn filed her notice of appeal in Florida's 1st District Court of Appeal. Her opening brief seems to indicate that she seeks review of voir dire, or jury selection, the entire trial, the judgment, and the sentence. The briefing hasn't yet concluded in the case, so it'll be a bit before the court decides whether there was any error. I've included a link in the show notes to the case management portal for the Florida Appellate Court, in case you'd like to follow the matter for updates. Following her conviction, the Navy quietly issued Kuhn a general discharge. I think this is sort of obvious, but I don't have any reason not to say it. If Kuhn's primary motivation was preserving contact in the relationships with her children, killing Colin only served to accomplish the opposite. During her initial interview, this all seemed to occur to Kuhn all at once. She realized her youngest children were fatherless, and she worried about what would happen if she went to jail. It was 20 minutes into the interview when she asked where they were and who they were with, inquiring if anyone had called Colin's parents so they could come take the kids. The eldest now lives with their biological father, the man Colin texted with on the day of his death, and the children she shared with Colin live with their grandparents. To the extent any of these children wish to continue a relationship with Kuhn, it will be through sterile visits in prison family rooms and communication from a distance. Because Colin was so close to earning his degree, Arizona State University awarded his Bachelor's of Science posthumously. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a minute to rate the podcast wherever you listen. I invite you to submit case suggestions and feedback to conductunbecomingpod@gmail.com or on conductunbecomingpod.com. Join me next time when we talk misappropriation. Until then, take care. Conduct Unbecoming is a podcast where I get to talk about interesting crimes and cases that involve U.S. military service members. I research, write, and produce the podcast myself. The opinions expressed are my own, and perhaps it's obvious. Conduct Unbecoming is not approved, authorized, or endorsed by the Department of Defense, or by their new preferred name and pronouns, the Department of War.